He pressed a trembling kiss to her lips, and it tasted of the salt of his tears. "I can't exist in a world where you do not." He'd only lived this long because, no matter his anger at her, he knew that she slept whole and unharmed. "Come back to me, my Zani." Silence. Until the very moment when he forced himself to give her into Cassandra's embrace, the seer's lilac hair was licked by the gold and orange of the enormous, impossible fissure deep into the earth above which they hovered, and the seafoam auras of her haunted eyes were tender, her arms careful as she cradled Zanaya against the floating softness of her gown. "You will care for her." It came out in order. Cassandra didn't tell him he had no right to give her orders. Gaze lost in the terrible gift that drove her to a madness that had her clawing out her eyes when she could no longer stand it, she said, "Alexander, Archangel of Persia, child of Gazrel and Cendrillon, before you lie 2 paths." Her tone was eerie, echoing as if spoken in a great chamber. Gut-tight, Alexander clenched his fists. It took everything he had to keep his tone civil. "I don't wish for blurry prophecies that could mean anything and need to be interpreted. I want to know if Zanaya will rise and when." Cassandra looked down at the body in her arms, a body she'd already wreathed in her flame. "This I do not know." Her face was soft now, her voice softer. "But I know this, Alexander. This is an ending, but it isn't the last ending. That too will come. Choose with care, for it will be the forever last." Then she was gone, taking with her his Zani with her brilliant spirit and warrior's heart. His own heart broke. Always, no matter what, he'd known she would return. He'd been nursing a grudge against her for millennia, getting ready to have the fight that he was owed. He'd known she'd laugh at him for refusing to let it go, but then she'd have fought with him, after which they'd have ended up in each other's arms. That was how it was meant to have been. That was the future for which he had waited for so long. This pain, a raw knot inside him. He didn't know how he made it through the time that followed. He felt glued together by nothing but his own will when he finally returned to his territory. Once in his lands, he went not to his fort, but to an isolated ridge of mountains where no one could hear his heart splinter. Wings flared out, he screamed out his grief and his rage, till it brought him to his knees, but still the wound inside him continued to bleed. He'd survived the loss of Zanaya before, but then it hadn't been a true loss. He'd known that she would rise again, that her timeline would cross with his again. He no longer had that surety. His Zani might sleep forevermore. Alexander screamed again, and his pain turned the mountain molten, a river of gold and silver and rarer precious metals that crept down every crack and seam, where they'd freeze at some point, a sculpture of astonishing beauty carved out of Alexander's grief.